Section 18 of the Story of London. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Paul Lawley Jones. The Story of London by Henry B. Wheatley. Chapter 9. Officials of the City. The chief of the officials of the City of London was, for many years after the Conquest, the castellan and bannerer. When William the Conqueror obtained possession of London, he built a castle on the river at each end of the city to intimidate the Londoners. The Tower was at the east end, and at the west end was what, according to Dugdale, was called at first the Castle. This was placed under the charge of Baynard, one of the Conqueror's followers, after whom it came to be known as Baynard's Castle. The hereditary office of Castellan was held by the family of Fitzwalter, by virtue of their possession of Baynard's Castle, the key of the city. The duties attached to this office are among the most important and interesting in the story of medieval London, and it is to be presumed that Baynard held the various privileges afterwards possessed by the family of Fitzwalter, but no notice of this is recorded. Robert Fitz-Richard was the first baron by tenure. He is said to have been the younger son of Richard Fitzgilbert, ancestor of the Earls of Clare. He was steward to Henry I, from whom he obtained the barony of Dunmow and the honour of the soke of Baynard's Castle, both which had been forfeited to the crown in 1111 by reason of the felony of William, Baron of Dunmow, son of Ralph Baynard, the Norman associate of William the Conqueror, after whom the castle was named. In connection with this soke, Robert held the hereditary office of standard-bearer of the city, the duties of which will be stated further on. He died in 1134 and was succeeded by his son, Walter Fitzrobert. The latter's son was Robert Fitzwalter, the most famous member of the family, and the one who transmitted to his descendants the permanent surname of Fitzwalter. This Fitzwalter was styled, quote, Marshal of the Army of God and Holy Church. End quote. He was one of the 25 barons appointed to enforce the observance of Magna Carta obtained from King John. An quote, agreement dated 15th to the 25th of June 1215 between King John of the one part and Robert Fitzwalter, Marshal of the Army of God and of Holy Church in England, 6 earls and 6 barons named, and other earls, barons and freemen of the other part, end quote, is preserved in the Public Record Office, and the following description of the document is given in the Catalogue of Manuscripts, etc. in the Museum of the Public Record Office, 1902. Quote, the earls, barons, and others shall hold the city of London, saving the royal revenues, and the Archbishop of Canterbury shall hold the Tower of London, saving the liberties of the city, until the Feast of the Assumption in the 17th year of the reign. In the meanwhile, oaths shall be taken throughout England to 25 barons, as is contained in the Charter for the liberties and security of the realm, and all things shall be done according to the said charter. Otherwise the city and the Tower shall be held as above, until all the said things shall be done. End quote. It is said in a note to this document that, quote, none of the 13 persons who are thus entered into an agreement with the king are mentioned among those upon whose advice he granted the Great Charter. End quote. The third baron was himself in trade, and he owned wine ships. He received special privileges from John, and the story of that king's treatment of his daughter Matilda is supposed to be an unfounded tale. In the year 1215, the insurgent barons entered the city at Aldgate, largely owing to the assistance of Robert Fitzwalter, whose position was of a commanding character. He died in 1235. Walter Fitzwalter succeeded his father Robert, and died in 1257. He was succeeded by his son Robert Fitzwalter, the 5th Baron. It is of the latter's duties and privileges that we possess an account, written by Robert Glover, Somerset Herald in the reign of Elizabeth, extracts from which are given by Dugdale in his Baronage of England, 1675. Quote, in time of war, he should serve the city in manner following, viz., to ride upon a light horse with 20 men-at-arms on horseback, their horses covered with cloth or harness, unto the great door of St. Paul's Church, with the banner of his arms carried before him. And being come in that manner thither, the Mayor of London, together with the sheriffs and aldermen, to issue armed out of the church unto the same door on foot, with a banner in his hand, having the figure of St. Paul depicted with gold thereon, but the feet, hands, and head of silver, holding a silver sword in his hand. And as soon as he shall see the mayor, sheriffs, and aldermen come on foot out of the church, carrying such a banner, he is to alight from his horse and salute him as his companion, saying, Sir Mayor, I am obliged to come hither to do my service which I owe to this city. To whom the mayor, sheriffs, and aldermen are to answer, We give to you, as our banner-bearer for this city, this banner by inheritance of the city, to bear and carry to the honour and profit thereof to your power. Whereupon the said Robert and his heirs shall receive it into their hands, and the mayor and sheriffs shall follow him to the door and bring him an horse worth £20, which horse shall be saddled with a saddle of his arms, and covered with silk depicted likewise with the same arms. And they shall take £20 sterling, and deliver it to the chamberlain of the said Robert for his expenses that day. Etc. There was a vacant ground opposite the great west door of St. Paul's where this interesting ceremony took place. The folk-moots were held in the churchyard at the east end of the cathedral. In 1275, 3 Edward I, Robert Fitzwalter obtained license from the Crown to convey Baynard Castle and the Tower of Montfichet to the Archbishop of Canterbury for the purpose of the foundation of the house and church of the Friars Preachers, or Black Friars. In the following year, Edward I confirmed the grant of 2 lanes adjacent to, quote, Castle Baynard and the Tower of Montfichet for the purposes of enlarging the aforesaid place, on condition that the said Archbishop should provide the citizens with a more convenient way, as he had now done. End quote. In 1277 to 1278, an alteration was made in the wall of the friary. When Sir Robert Fitzwalter conveyed Baynard Castle to the Archbishop, he specially reserved all his rights and privileges in the following terms. Quote, Provided that by reason of this grant nothing should be extinguished to him and his heirs which did not belong to his barony, but that whatsoever relating thereto, as well in rents, landing of vessels, and other liberties and privileges in the city of London or elsewhere without diminution, which to him, the said Robert, or to that barony had anciently appertained, should be thenceforth reserved. End quote. We know very little of this Tower of Montfichet, but it must have been closely connected with Baynard Castle. There is a reference to it and its owner in the Chronique de la guerre entre les Anglois et les Écossois en 1173 et 1174 par Jourdain Fantôme. Howlett's Chronicles of Stephen, Henry II, and Richard I, Rolls series. Quote, Gilbert de Montfichet has fortified his castle, and says that the Clares are leagued with him. End quote. As Mr. Round points out to me, this reference to the Clares must relate to the proprietors of Baynard's Castle, who, as previously noted, were of the same family as the Clares. Walter Fitzrobert is also referred to in this metrical chronicle. The Barons Fitzwalter possessed many privileges in time of peace, which are set out by Dugdale, among which was the right of punishing by drowning at Woodwharf persons guilty of treason. But it was as a constable of Barnard Castle that they enjoyed these privileges, as well as the office of bannerer to the City of London. A beautiful seal inscribed Sigillum Roberti Filii Walteri was found at Stamford, Lincolnshire, in the reign of Charles II, and is the subject of a paper by John Charles Brooke of the Herald's College in Archaeologia. Quote, In this seal we see Fitzwalter's horse elegantly engraved and covered with trappings of his arms, so exquisitely represented that they evidently appear to be of a much finer texture than those commonly used, the muscles of the animal being seen under them, and as much as engraving can represent drapery appear to be silk, as described by Glover. And what is remarkable, his arms are carved on the rest behind the saddle, which is a rare instance, and evidently allude to that which the mayor was to present to him. End quote. On the seal are represented the arms of Fitzwalter's second wife, Eleanor, daughter of Robert de Ferrers, Earl of Ferrers and Derby. She was married in 1298 and died in 1304. Therefore the date of the seal is fixed within 6 years. Mr. Brooke refers to another seal of Baron Fitzwalter which he used, 28 Edward I, anno 1300, and in which the dragon occurring in the former seal beneath the horse is used as a supporter. Robert Fitzwalter died in 1325, and in 1328 the wardship of his son John was granted by the mayor and aldermen to his widow Joanna. In 1347 Sir John Fitzwalter still claimed to have franchise in the ward of Castle Baynard, but the city entirely repudiated the claim as, quote, altogether repugnant to the liberties of the city, end quote. He caused stocks to be set up in the ward of Castle Baynard, and claimed to make deliverance of men there imprisoned. In consequence of this action, a conference was held by the mayor, aldermen, and commonalty, at which, quote, it was agreed that the said Sir John Fitzwalter had no franchise within the liberty of the city aforesaid, nor is he in future to intermeddle with any plea in the Guildhall of London, or with any matters touching the liberties of the city. End quote. The recorder, the chief official of the city, is appointed for life. He was formerly appointed by the city, but since the Local Government Act of 1888, he is nominated by the city and approved by the Lord Chancellor. His duties and his oath are recorded in the Liber Albus. In 1329, Gregory de Norton, the then holder of the office, obtained an increase in salary, 100 shillings yearly, as also his robe of the same pattern as the aldermen's robes. The Common Sergeant was formerly appointed by the city, but since 1888 by the Lord Chancellor. He is the recorder's principal assistant. The next great official is the Town Clerk, who is appointed by the Common Council and re-elected annually. John de Batterkell, Clerk of the City, is referred to in Letter Book A, and this is the first recorded mention of the office afterwards known as the Common Clerk, and later as Town Clerk. Next to the recorder, the Town Clerk was the chief officer in the local courts of law called the hustings and the Mayor's Court. Among the distinguished men who have held the office, 2 names stand out, viz. John Carpenter and William Dunthorne. Carpenter, Town Clerk in the reigns of Henry V and Henry VI, was elected in 1417. He was called also Secretary of the City, a title not applied to any other Town Clerk. He is best known as the compiler of the Liber Albus and as founder of the City of London School. Dunthorne's name, 1462, is associated with the Liber Dunthorne, which contains transcripts from the Liber Albus, Liber Customarum, letter books, etc. The Chamberlain, or Comptroller of the King's Chamber, is appointed by the livery. He was originally a king's officer, and the office was probably instituted soon after the Conquest. It is mentioned in documents of the 12th century. On June 28, 1232, the office of, quote, King's Chamberlain of London, end quote, was granted for life to Peter de Rivalis. His duties and privileges as stated in the grant are very extensive and important. Quote, he shall have for life the custody of the King's houses at Southampton and the King's prize of wine there, custody of the King's Jewry, of the Mint of England, end quote, and, quote, all other things pertaining to the office of Chamberlain of London, end quote. By another grant of the same year, the said Peter, Treasurer of Poitiers for life, was given the custody of the ports and coasts of England, saving the port of Dover. When the office is mentioned in 1275, it was combined with the offices of Mayor and Coroner. The functions of coroner were often exercised by the Chamberlain and sheriffs, and when the Chamberlain was called away from the city by the King, he appointed a deputy coroner. The office was sometimes held by the King's butler, to whom appertained the office of coroner. William Trent, a wine merchant of Bergerac, was appointed King's butler on the 25th of November 1301, 30 Edward I. He became also the King's Chamberlain of the City and Coroner of London. Andrew Horne, a fishmonger by trade who kept a shop in Bridge Street, held the office of Chamberlain for several years. He was the compiler of Liber Horn, which contains charters, statutes, grants, etc. To him also has been attributed the authorship of the law treatise of medieval titles entitled The Mirror of Justice. He died in 1328. Many attempts were made by the citizens to get coronership into their own hands, and at last Edward IV sold the right to appoint a coroner of their own, independent of the king's butler, for £7,000. The remembrancer, or state amanuensis, is appointed by the Common Council. The office was held from 1571 to 1584 by a distinguished man, Thomas Norton, MP, who was joint author with Thomas Sackville, Earl of Dorset, of the tragedy of Gorboduc. He left a manuscript on the ancient duties of the Lord Mayor and Corporation, an account of which was published by J. Payne Collier in Archaeologia. The Common Hunt was an official mentioned in the Liber Albus, where we learn that John Courtney was appointed to the office in 1417. The office was abolished in the year 1807. Of officers in immediate attendance on the mayor may be mentioned the sword-bearer and the sergeant at mace. The first notice of the office of sword-bearer occurs in the Liber Albus, 1419, and the first record in the minute books of the appointment of a sword-bearer is in 4 Henry VI, 1426. Mr. Hope remarks that, quote, "The absence of earlier notices is probably due to the fact that the sword-bearer was appointed, according to the entry in the Liber Allus, as propre costage du maire, and not at the cost of the city." End quote. The sword-bearer is remarkable on account of the distinctive head covering or cap of maintenance which is appropriated to his office. It is not known when the City of London first possessed a mace or maces, but Mr. Hope refers to the Liber Customarum to prove that as early as 1252 there were sergeants who carried staves of some kind as emblems of authority. Quote, "We know this from the claim put forth on the occasion of the Iter of the Pleas of the Crown held at the Tower in 1321, that the mayor and citizens of London should have their own porter and usher, and their own sergeants with their staves. As it was shown that the same claim had been successfully made in 1276 to 1277, and in 1252 it was allowed." End quote. Mr. Hope quotes from Letter Book F a record of the appointment of Robert Flambard as mace-bearer in 1338, and from this it is clear that the office was not then a newly created one. For the due carrying on of the business of the corporation, several new offices have at various times been established, but the foregoing are the officials who carried on the work of the city during the Middle Ages. Much of interest might have been added of these men, but it is only necessary here to refer to them generally as those to whom so much of the history of London was due. The chief business of the city has been carried on for many centuries in the Guildhall, which is of unknown antiquity. It is almost certain that the building was in existence on the same spot as early as the 12th century. It was rebuilt in 1411, and has been greatly altered at different times since then. The most interesting portion of the old building will be found in the extensive Gothic crypt. The open timber roof of the hall was not added until the alterations of 1866 to 1870 by the late Sir Horace Jones. End of Chapter 9. End of Section 18.